was time to leave Ghana and fly east into the heart of Africa. My destination? Rwanda. Rwanda is one of the jewels of Africa. In places, its countryside is as beautiful as any in the world. But on the outskirts of the capital city, Kigali, there are potent reminders of the event that's sure to scar the face of this nation for generations to come. This is the Genocide Museum, a place that commemorates the 1 million Rwandans who died during the appalling genocide of 1994. On one side were those who died, mostly from a minority ethnic group called the Tutsis, and on the other were their killers, the majority, Hutus. Why it happened is a long and complicated story. But many Rwandans trace the roots of the conflict back to the 19th century, when the country's colonial powers fueled ethnic rivalry between Hutus and Tutsis. It was, they claim, a classic policy of divide and rule, the effects of which festered long after the Europeans had gone. In a landscape scarred by the mass graves of so many victims, it's almost impossible to imagine how this country could ever rebuild itself. Yet across the river in old Kigali city, there's a sense of purpose and determination, and even optimism, which is giving birth to a new Rwanda. This is the Kigali of old, really. This is the Kigali of its independence and its colonial era. And what's really striking is that it's an architecture of the sort of 50s. It's a festive architecture. It's trying to sort of set up these long regulating lines with these canopies and windows. And what's really interesting here is that even though Kigali has really the most pleasant climate I've experienced in Africa, you have arcades to kind of allow people to kind of let their shops spill out, let the life bustle, let people sit, you know, and watch the street and watch the hustle and bustle of this really very busy mercantile area. From on high, you can see the contradictions of life in Kigali. Today, the country is enjoying something of an economic boom. Yet its showpiece capital city remains a tired low-rise relic of the past. But not for much longer. Within 20 years, the Rwandan government says it wants Kigali to become, in their own words, the Chicago of Africa. Looking around, the first sign of an architectural transformation is already evident. Glass towers now pierce the skies above Kigali. Meanwhile, the old African market's been demolished and fenced off to make way for, you've guessed it, a Western-style shopping mall. I'm amazed to see housing estates that resemble the suburbs of an English new town. And everywhere I look, someone is building something. Luxury housing is now nestling snugly on the hillsides. It's extraordinary that you get these very beautiful gardens, but then you have this barbed wire everywhere, which is just a shame, really. Which is the problem of Africa. By 2020, the Chicago makeover should be complete. But is this undiluted Western model right for Africa? Not all Rwandan architects are so sure.
My vision in African cities are actually not very different to what we are seeing here. But of course with better infrastructure and a town which concentrates on a human being.
On the human being.
When you go to these actually new developed countries like China, like Bangkok,
Singapore,
Singapore, but you see, actually you have just, okay, the town are beautiful, but people are not happy. So my vision for Kigali is actually to try to sell this happiness to foreigners.
I like that as a brand.
Yes. So yeah.
Kigali, the happy city.
Yeah, exactly. Happy, secure city. Where actually a human being is the center of everything, and not the other way around.
Keeping the people of Kigali happy is just part of the challenge, because Rwanda remains overwhelmingly a traditional rural society. Most of Rwanda looks like this, and 90% of the people actually live in these kind of places. If you look really closely, you'll see houses dotted in between these wonderful groves. And this is how people live, sort of separated from each other, really in small little groups. It's incredibly beautiful, and it's an amazing integrated way of living with the landscape. The trouble is that these small, widely scattered settlements don't fit in with Rwanda's economic pretensions. It's a small country, and this land is now required for intensive industrial-scale farming. But where will the people go? Rwanda has a problem. And this is what they've come up with. It's essentially a cluster community, and it's very different to the original way of life that Rwandans have. But what it does do is offer services, education, and health in a central place. Now, these places are happening all over Rwanda, and there's even a name for it. It's called Imidugudu. Imidugudu settlements have been specially built by the government to rehouse Rwandans from the countryside and free up the land for intensive farming. The trouble is, many people don't like it. To men like Baptiste, who has been rehoused in the state Imidugudu, this is the equivalent of being forced to live in a tower block. Life here is difficult.
For instance, if a kid fights here, then you find yourself in grudges with your neighbors. Also, I have to go to my farm, which is a very long distance from here to find something to eat. And for instance, when it rains, that means I won't have food for the day because I can't go that distance to my farm. So then it's much easier to live in the village, in the kind of place where we lived.
Rwanda's dilemma is shared by many countries across Africa. The nation must develop if it's to pay its current bills. Would the changes I've witnessed in Rwanda have happened without the genocide? Perhaps. But surely not with so much speed, determination, and purpose. After all the suffering these people endured in 1994, I can only wish them luck. Coincidentally, 1994 was also a watershed year in the country where I'll end my African journey. And like Rwanda, it too is building monuments to remind its people of a traumatic past. My visit to South Africa begins 2 hours north of Johannesburg, in a province called Mpumalanga, formerly the Eastern Transvaal. I've come here to see the unique architectural traditions of the Ndebele. 400 years ago, they moved down from Central Africa to settle in the south. And with them, they brought a very particular way of living. I'm joined by Johannesburg architect Peter Rich. He's fearful of the extinction of the Ndebele culture, so much so that he spent decades cataloguing and mapping their settlements. The overhead plan for this one reveals the key elements of its design, the external courtyard.
Climatically, these courtyards, and the courtyard being a universal principle that goes across Africa, you saw it in Mali, you'll see it in the Middle East, you'll see it across Asia. It's something we've actually forgotten about. It's passive energy done simply.
Passive energy is about using nature and not a machine to control your environment. And this is what the Ndebele do so well. These courtyards become, they're rooms, really.
They are rooms.
Yeah. It's
It's
about
an
living
articulated
outside.
outdoor room. You
Yeah.
live outside, you
Yeah.
store and sleep inside.
Yeah.
And the climate allows for it.
It's amazing.
Yeah. I'm really interested as an architect is how they gave architectural expression to that.
Yeah.
And what's remarkable about the Ndebele is the Ndebele started appropriating the changing fashions that were taking place in white cultures,
Yeah.
which they appropriated and
Yeah.
reinterpreted,
Yeah.
just as we as architects do,
Yeah.
and gave it new meaning,
Yeah.
and that's what we're going to see subsequently today.
Right. 40 minutes away, I arrived at the second settlement that illustrates what Peter was talking about, the Ndebele tradition of graphic painting.
Well, this is Maria Macheka. She's approaching 80. She's painting not for ceremonial purpose, she's painting for pride. And this diminutive lady does these monumental walls and sculptures.
It's amazing.
That shows us how the Ndebele have externalized and presented themselves to the outside world as a way of identifying this is who we are.
These designs may express who the Ndebele are, but in African terms, it's a relatively new badge of their ethnic identity. Their art only goes back as far as the early 20th century, when the Ndebele decided to produce their own versions of paintings that had arrived from the West.
What you've seen here is mural art applied to a sculpturally embellished wall, which is monumental, which proclaims itself out to the landscape and defines a series of entries to private realms behind us. So it's an incredibly beautiful idea.
Ndebele painting and architecture finds an echo in the beaded body decoration that people have developed over time. This was my final visit of the day. Another Maria showed me her ceremonial clothes. It's easy to understand why Peter sees a direct link between this kind of art and the modernist movement of the early 20th century.
I think if you look at a lot of the great modernists, like Barragan acknowledged that when he went to Europe and he went to North Africa, Le Corbusier acknowledged when he went to North Africa, and when you go to Jena in Mali, you can almost see what touched the hearts of modernists, because you had one or two materials in a very molded, ordered, and structured environment.
What am I having a feeling is kind of blur?
Courtyard in its structure. So there was the inherent structure, and that's what excited them. What we've overlooked is something of real substance and real sophistication.
Is it
real
blur?
content. And you know, there has been a perception that something's from Africa, and what we see here is people who are highly architecturally articulate, and they're actually high artists.
The homes of the Ndebele testify to the vitality and creativity of Southern African design. North of here, across the border in Zimbabwe, there's another dramatic symbol of the architectural splendors of Southern Africa. Built in the 12th century by the Shona people, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe stretch across 1,800 acres of the landscape east of the Kalahari Desert. Once, it was the center of a great empire. Its scale testifies to the immense ambition and technical skills of the builders of this once magnificent royal court. The desire to produce a distinctive architectural signature, combining influences from the West as well as the South, burns strongly here. The willingness to embrace different cultures has not always been a feature of life in Southern Africa. Until a few years ago, my next destination, Johannesburg, was a city determined to keep cultures apart. My first stop is at the edge of Joburg's sprawling suburbs. Opposite a brash theme park and casino complex lies South Africa's Apartheid Museum. The building is powerful and striking, though admittedly, it's not exactly what you'd call touchy-feely. But that's not the response the architects wanted to achieve.
It is about trying to recreate a sense of what it was like. So you get a card at the front door, and the one says whites only, and the other one says non-whites. So immediately the theme is to deal with separation. We wanted to traverse the site and use the site to view the city. So you go all the way up on top of the building. You look at the whole landscape. You take it in. You see Johannesburg as it is today, you see the remains of the mines, and then you look into the story.
It's hard not to be moved and impressed by the Apartheid Museum. The relentless severity of the design is wholly appropriate to the subject it commemorates. It is a building that left me shaken and stirred. So I move on to Joburg's most famous township, Soweto, the satellite city that was once a center of resistance to the old apartheid regime. Here, in an area called Clifftown, I discover another memorial, but this time, it's one that celebrates South Africa's liberation from the long nightmare that was apartheid. When completed, Walter Sisulu Square will stand on the spot where 50 years ago, the heroes of the anti-apartheid movement drafted the Freedom Charter. Espousing the fundamental principles of human rights and equality, the Charter would eventually become enshrined in South Africa's new constitution. When Precious Makwe was growing up in Soweto, she would have been aware of the Freedom Charter. What the young Precious didn't know was that she would become the first black African woman to graduate in architecture from the University of Cape Town. Nor that she'd become one of the team of 4 architects responsible for designing the square that celebrates.
The new square is basically where the 9 blocks are going to be. The 9 blocks, they represent the 9 regions of South Africa, and each block you're going to have stones from various regions paved there, and the trees are going to be indigenous from each province. So it speaks about life, it speaks about participation, it speaks about dialogue, it speaks about democracy, because basically, though it's in Soweto, in Cape Town, it involves everybody who's a South African.
Each of the 9 blocks will be in the shape of a large raised cross, an overt reference to democracy and the power of the vote. But the new square is not just symbolic. The plans include a practical contribution to South Africa's housing problem by featuring affordable housing that Precious hopes will dispatch the nearby slums for good.
I'm so proud of you. I mean, if I could even get a project like this by the time I die, I will be so happy. But you've already done it, and it's at the beginning of your career.
It is very exciting, and I'm really humbled, and it's such a privilege. I never imagined that one would be involved in such a project of so much significance. The symbolism of this place, it's mind-boggling. So it is quite an exhilarating experience, I must say.
It's hard to judge the success of Walter Sisulu Square from this building site. But back in Joburg, I've heard of a completed building which might just offer a fresh vision for the future of South African architecture. High on a hill in downtown Joburg, I found a clump of buildings surrounded by a scruffy collar of greenery. The city seems to have little time for what was once its powerful military heart, the old 18th century fort and prison. It was here that Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi both found themselves as guests of the government. It's not really a place where you'd expect to find South Africa's newest, most precious symbol of freedom and equality. But here, just below the ramparts, is the new Constitutional Court, the building where the Soweto Freedom Charter is today upheld by 11 judges, each handpicked by Nelson Mandela himself. One of them is Albie Sachs.
We chose the design that captured best this theme of justice under a tree.
What does that mean?
Historically, traditionally in Africa, people, communities settle their disputes under a tree.
Right.
So we had to decide then, how do you, in a modern building, using modern building techniques, convey the sense of justice under a tree without having a giant tree that would be ludicrous.
Yes. In 1988, Sachs lost an arm. after the apartheid government tried to kill him with a car bomb. Earlier, he'd been jailed as a political prisoner, which perhaps explains why he's so keen to see the building acknowledge the evils of the past. As it turns out, the whole place has been constructed on the site of another of apartheid's most notorious jails, the so-called Number 4, parts of which still survive within the fabric of the new building. Are these the reused bricks?
Yes, these are the bricks from the old working trial prison.
Wow.
The Number 4 building was the most notorious building, the Bastille of Johannesburg. If an African man went missing,
Right.
the family would go to the police station, the mortuary, the hospital, and Number 4.
Wow.
There are songs about Number 4. It's burnt into the minds of the people. And so you have the walls, beautiful, ugly walls, I call them. The stone is beautiful.
This stone is extremely beautiful.
But yet inside, that's where people suffered. They were crammed in there. They were overcrowded. They were humiliated. They were hosed down. They were stripped naked and searched constantly. They were treated not like human beings.
The miserable history of one side of the building contrasts with the beams of light which define the other. A long, shallow staircase takes visitors on a journey to justice. Here taking the form of the courtroom where Albie Sachs and his fellow judges sit. Outside, its glittering metallic panels filter the evening sun into the building. In true African style, this wall tells 1,000 stories, immortalizing heroes like Gandhi and depicting villains like the terrorists of 9/11. But the contemporary look of the court hides many ancient architectural features, including its central courtyard. And it has a ventilation system which channels air chilled above a series of water pools and routes it back into the building as a cool breeze. Meanwhile, the angles and openings all around me are cleverly designed to let the warm winter sun in, but keep the scorching summer sun out. In fact, from certain angles, the building seems to have been constructed almost entirely out of light. Could you tell us what this building means to the new South Africa?
I would say it's in complete sync with the Constitution that it is the justification for the building. And it's saying don't be afraid of your design, don't be afraid of ideas, be daring and challenging, be disciplined, controlled. Don't be afraid of being in Africa. Let light be part of the glory of the building. Light is seen as the enemy all over the place, and we have heavy curtains and shutters and things to keep out the light. Light is part of African.
I wasn't sure about this building at first. It seemed too earnest, too eager to please. But the more I moved around it, the more comfortable I began to feel. What's amazing to me about this building is that it's the first time that I've seen a building on this continent which actually marries any sense of placemaking, spacemaking, which refers to the continent within something which is a public building. And there's a kind of celebration of Africanness. There's also a celebration of modernity, of contemporary ideas in the building construction. And there's also a celebration of art and craft, indigenous craft. And I feel very much that this building is a South African building because it speaks about the people and about the history